hours driving on the highway. Far away, far away, far away. Every moment I was spending on regrets was such a waste, such a waste, such a waste. Looking on the city light.
Hey, everybody.
Did they hear us, Jared?
Not yet. Now they will. Okay.
We're just doing sign language, guys, because our audio guy didn't have the audio on.
We have an audio guy?
Well, welcome to the Ken McElroy Show. This is Danille here with Ken.
Hey, guys. Today's going to be fun.
I know. We just got off a really fun weekend. We were in Jekyll Island for your collective.
Yeah, so first of all, the collective is a mastermind that I do. A lot of people want to mentor, be coach, or whatever. So I committed 4 weekends a month, and we got some incredible members that came. We had about, almost 100 people?
Almost 100 people. It's a very small group, very private group.
It's really, really fun.
But it's really fun. And we went to Jekyll Island, so Jekyll Island is where they created the
Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve. And then we thought it was going to be kind of like, kind of quiet and secretive, but it's not. Jekyll Island is where all the billionaires used to live.
Yeah, we went through Rockefeller's house.
That was
Frank
really
Goodyear
cool.
And Pulitzer. Yeah, Pulitzer.
Yep.
Morgan, J.P. Morgan. They all had houses and at this place.
Yeah.
And it was cool. So if you go, just Google it. And then we interviewed G. Edward Griffith, who is the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. The Creature, of course, is the Federal Reserve document. And it was really cool. We were actually had all our meetings in the Federal Reserve room.
We had Joseph Wang discuss the Federal Reserve, and we'll have him on the podcast for sure. But
he's coming to Limitless.
Oh yeah, he's coming to Limitless.
Yeah, so he works for the Federal Reserve. He has a book called Central Banking 101, and we bought it for everyone that was there. And anyway, it was really fun. It was just interesting to see kind of the evolution of the Federal Reserve, how it works. And it's a big hot topic right now, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And speaking of Limitless, tickets just went up. So now they're $1,099, and it runs that way through March 31st.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to come to Limitless, it's going to be amazing. But the time to get tickets is now, because prices are only going to keep going up.
You guys probably know, no sales job here. It sold out last year, and people were pretty upset, and they waited till the last minute. And that's the truth. So, do what you want.
Yep. So Randy is saying it's actually Sea Island. So I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
Sea Island.
That didn't come up, but we'll have to look into it.
Then I want the hat and the gear I bought I'm going to send it all back.
Anyway, so other than that, you got a happy hour tonight for your premium members.
Oh, yeah. So this is also good. By the way, I met this guy, Scott Saunders. He's coming on tonight. He joined the collective. And, so that's how I met him. And he has one of the biggest 1031 businesses in the country. And he saw me speak, came up to me and said, I want to learn more about this collective. He joined, and I learned a little bit about his company. But he is on all these national boards, and he's going to be able to talk about 1031 exchanges. As you guys know, 1031s are a way for you to roll legally your tax forward into another asset. And the rules have changed over the years, so I can't wait to talk to him, because we've never had anyone on that does 1031s. So I'm excited about that. That's tonight at 5 Arizona time, Mountain Standard Time.
Awesome. So before we hop into the topic today of questions to ask the syndicator, and we think this one's really important right now because there's a lot of people that are raising money and raising capital, and we're going into a very tricky time. And there's a lot of people that have invested with syndicators that maybe aren't getting the full story on what's happening. So we're going to kind of cover a lot of that today. But before we do, let's just hop into our Twitter question of the week. And Ken, you asked, what first sparked your passion for real estate? And Craig said Tonka trucks.
By the way, that's not a Tonka, by the way. Just saying, Craig. I love the picture, but I grew up with Tonkas. And, that looks like plastic. It looks like, I don't know, maybe it's this version's Tonka.
And then the next response we have. So Alex said urgency to find a better way to retire versus 401k and Social Security. And that's a really good one.
That's actually the heart of everything. You
Yep.
know, if you think about it, there's an article. I was trying to read it before today, but I couldn't. But it's basically talking about the 401k performance in 2022 is not that great. So anyway, I think people, when they open their statements for 2022, they may or may not be happy. And he's right. Social Security is a huge entitlement program that is going to be hitting all the baby boomers. It already is, but it's just going to continue.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be enough to live on.
Yep. And York said ownership and cash flow, which,
Yeah.
you know, what sparked your passion for real estate?
Milk. No, literally. I for me, I didn't really want to work anywhere. I didn't want to. I'm what they call now unemployable, because I just didn't want to have to rely on. It's kind of the same thing you went through. It's not that hard to figure out if you start off at, let's say, $35,000 a year. At the end of the year, maybe you're at 38. Like for the next year, and then maybe you get to 40, and then it just seemed like a long, slow progression for me, and I didn't want to rely on. I didn't really understand inflation and all that stuff at that point when I was coming out of college. I think, I knew what it was, but I didn't really understand it as well as I do now. And I think I wanted to be able to have freedom, time, and do what I wanted. And I was just lucky to fall into property management and be able to see that firsthand. And that's it. That was it for me. Being in a property management position, I was able to see people that were doing it.
Right.
And I was managing the property for them. So then I was immersed into that world. And then I'm like, well, if they can do that, I can do that, especially some of the people that were doing it. I was like, okay.
Yeah, you kind of see that now too, although, you're also starting to see missteps. But
Yeah.
I would agree with you. Just trying to figure out a different alternative than working 9 to 5 and trying to collect a paycheck.
That was it for me. Yeah, I like to work. I like to.
Yeah, you still work a lot.
I do. I really enjoy. I think it's fun, starting new things and doing new things. But I never wanted to be in a position where I was reliant on that 3% increase a year for good behavior.
Right. So let's jump into the topic today. So basically, you have a lot of people that are trying to invest right now or have invested in the last couple of years in a syndicator. And, what we need to go over, because some people may be invested with somebody that didn't have very much experience, or they're not getting the straight answer of what's happening. So we're going to go over today, questions that you should be asking a syndicator, questions that a lot of people don't ask syndicators.
Well, before we do that, by the way, I agree. I love this topic. You and I talked about this. I also think you have to take a look at when you're doing it. So I always tell people that the market is more important than the property. And so what that means is, when I first said that, that means that where you choose to invest is going to make a big difference. So if you invest in Las Vegas right now, or Phoenix right now, or Portland or San Francisco right now, you're going to have different results financially. So I think that's important. So that's why I say the market is more important than property. But then again, I think you have to back up from there and say your timing. Timing is important. So what that means is, when interest rates are going up right now, and inflation is at an all-time high, and we're threatened with the possibility of a recession, is this the time? And I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just saying that you have to look at all these things. But I think what happens is people wrap their head around, and they have some extra cash, and they go to a seminar, or they watch something, or they have a friend that does it, and they go, okay, I'm going to do that too. Almost like just checking the box without considering all the risks and all the things that you could potentially have. Then, of course, the question becomes who. So no different than you picking a financial advisor, a wealth manager, a coach to train with. It doesn't really matter, Who are you going to pick? Who is that team member? And so, but there's a lot of things that have to be considered before you get to that point.
Right.
And I think, and the reason I bring that up is because I have people. You guys know I did that pencil down video. And, well, some people know. If you haven't, go take a look. It was a little controversial.
Mm-hmm.
So even in my own office, which I loved. So, my acquisition guys, I got analysts, I got investors, of course, which I love, and they certainly put us here. But I believed it. I believed that at the time, interest rates were going to go up. I believed that cap rates would go up, and they both have, period. So now I could have been wrong, but based on the signs I was seeing, I believed that was going to happen. So why do I bring that up? Because there's people in the last 3 or 4 months that have just now decided to get into real estate investing.
Right.
That's why I bring it up.
Well, even over the last couple years.
Yeah, a couple years is a little different, when rates were low, but it just shows me how out of touch they really are.
But if they secured debt.
Yes, correct. Yeah, that's true. But my point is if somebody came to me last month, and they have, and the month before, and they have, and the month before, and they have, and said, I'm ready to start investing, even on this channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I always question, wow, they're just really not looking at the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
The real estate prices are going down. That's fact. Interest rates are going up. That's a fact. Costs of everything are going up. That's a fact. Cap rates are going up. That's a fact. There's all these things that are happening right now, and so it's a good time to watch. So when people decide to invest, I'm always find it interesting as to why now. And so you guys have all seen the bell curve. Well, what we just went through is this expansion cycle and the hyper cycle, and we're peaking, and now we're coming down. Who knows how long and how far? The point is, things are starting to drop. And you're going to find people out there that are in the business that are going to say, rates are going to go down this year. Rates are going down. Rates are going down. That's just completely, as I said this weekend, if it's in the future, it's not a lie. Let me say that again. If it's in the future, it's not a lie. But if somebody makes that prediction, then they have to back it up with something. And that's the issue I have. And so you got to be careful, I think, if you're coming into the business right now. And you also have to be careful if you invested in the business in the last couple of years. So I want to get off my soapbox here because I think this is a great topic. But I just think that you have to understand what's going on in the market. And you have to understand where it's heading. And I don't certainly have all the answers, but I am looking at all the facts. Of what the Fed's saying, what they're doing, where rates are heading, and what's happening in the commercial markets, and I'm starting to look at cracks in distressed debt right now, even at the Blackstone level. There's an article that came out this week where a whole bunch of multifamily buildings in New York are hitting the market because of distressed debt. That's Blackstone. So we're starting to see the very beginning of this. I still think we're about in the second inning.
Second or third.
Yeah, maybe second to third inning.
So now hopping into the topic and basing it off of what you just said, when you get started asking, a syndicator some questions, then the number one thing you need to look at is their track record, especially in a market like this.
For sure. Yeah, I remember. Well, just think about this. Whether you're turning your money over to somebody, this is important. Who is it? Period. I'm right. Like, who do you take? Robert Kiyosaki always says, who are your teachers? I love that because it really kind of solves things. Like if you're gonna, like the guy I worked out with this morning has been at this gym for 23 years, right? He's been a trainer for 23 years. He's about my age, and he has learned a lot through that time. He's got wisdom. Now, of course, that's just workout partner. But I do think that those are the concepts are transferable to everything that you do. When I climbed Kilimanjaro, I found somebody that climbed Mount Everest, and he was my guide, because I wanted the best. I wanted somebody, and he was in his 50s at the time. So you start, and I climbed it twice with him. So you start to find, again, same thing with syndication, same thing with wealth management, same thing with anything that you do. Who is it, and how experienced are they, and have they been through downturn? What is their track record? And I think that's where you have to start. Like, would you invest all your money with a kid that graduated and works for, one of the big, like a Schwab or a Merrill Lynch, and he's been there a year? Would you do that? And if so, why? And, or would you go with somebody that's maybe been there for 20 plus years and has a track record of some? And that's all we're talking about here. And I don't think a lot of people place enough attention on this one main issue.
Right.
It's almost like they decide, okay, I'm ready to invest, and now I'm just going to give it to anyone that makes me feel good.
Yeah, they base it on emotion instead of facts, and that's why we always say, trust but verify.
Yeah.
So how do you judge somebody's track record, right? And so one of the questions is simple. It's, how long have you been doing this?
Yeah, and but also it's mathematical.
Right.
Show me the properties that you bought. Show me the returns. Show me how they performed. Show me your track record. Did you pay off your investors? Did you pay off the debt? Did it do what you said? Was the business plan that they gave you, that you invested in, did that happen or not? Right.
Yeah.
So all of those things, that's basic due diligence.
Right.
That's a fair amount of money people are turning over.
Yeah. And you want to see, that track record, like you said. And then, also what locations do you invest in?
So that's back to the market versus
Right.
the property. So you start to take a look at, there are people right now buying in markets that are declining pretty significantly. Like, let's just pick on Boise, right? So we have a place in Idaho, so it's easy to pick on Boise. People that are in Boise are going to fight strong. Oh, yeah, this
I know,
is temporary.
you Boise people out there.
Like,
Let's hear it.
but Boise's bubble is popping.
Yeah.
Period, right? And it ran up as a result of low interest rates. It's flipping beautiful there.
Well, it ran up with low interest rates and, how open the state was and all of that.
And a lot of migration moved there. And Boise's literally gorgeous. And so I understand why people might want to be there, but it's a relatively small market, and it's popping. It's actually deflating. And so that's okay. But the people in Boise, if you're a real estate agent, a home builder, or whatever you are, you're going to be very optimistic still. You've got these rose-colored glasses on. And that's why I think, so if a syndicator came to me today, and they do, and say, we've got a multifamily project in Boise, you got to decide whether that's a better one, or is it better to be in Dallas? Then that's what I'm talking about. Part of diversification in real estate, you can have a property, let's say, in multiple markets, and they're all gonna perform differently based on the market fundamentals. And so that's why the market is more important than the property. That's one of the very basic things I put in my very first book, The ABCs of Real Estate Investing. The market is more important than the property, period. There are markets where people are leaving, and there are markets where people are going. And that is as simple as it gets. And that increased population, that increased employment, that what it does is it puts extra demand on housing or shelter. So it pushes up housing prices. It pushes up rent prices. So those are the kinds of things. So market, I always find it interesting, because what I found during this last run with the syndicators specifically is they can't necessarily compete in, let's say, Phoenix or some of the Dallas, let's say, or some of the bigger markets. And so what they do is they go to some of these smaller little markets. and then there might be, so let's call LA, Phoenix, Dallas maybe first tier, and then second tier would be, let's say Tucson, because Tucson is much smaller than Phoenix. But then third tier would be, maybe like Prescott or Payson or Flagstaff, right? And then you got so you start to look, and they're very different based on the people coming in, coming out, the way they're run, the employment base, all that kind of stuff is important for the stability of that market. And so what we've seen in the last few years are people going to these second, third tier markets, and then they make it look like it's the best place ever, and it might be, but the point is, you start to there's more risk with those second and third tier markets, a lot more risk.
And those are typically called up and coming areas.
Yeah, they are. That's a good point. Yeah, and they might be. I mean that. Like a lot of times you might find like Tesla's moving and they're doing some battery stuff, and you've got some solar stuff, and you've got all kinds of really cool tech and industrial happening all over the place. Amazon and the way they grow. So there are things that are happening in a lot of those up and coming markets. But you got to look at it year over year over year. And I think one of the things, like Ross and I went into Oklahoma City years ago, and it was low and at the time. So we were like, okay, this is a very affordable market. We went there, we bought there. But 6 or 7 years later, it was still about the same. It was the same city. There wasn't a lot that that the city had done to grow it, and a lot of people weren't moving there. And so we ended up exiting that one, doing a 1031 and rolling into another market. That's why the market is so important, because you can be flat for a long, long time.
Well, and the thing too is that a lot of times with these up and coming areas is that once the economy starts to go sideways a little bit, people stop developing there, so it never really comes to fruition. It can be put on hold. I know in Arizona, that's what happened with Maricopa back in 2008. It was up and coming. There was a lot of building, and then all those homes were the homes that got foreclosed on because they were people's investment properties, and then it never really materialized into anything.
Well, let's pick on Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, since you know that. Let's just pick on it, because I've been going there for 15 years. If you're a local, you're not happy right now because you can't afford the rent. You can't afford to buy a home. The rates have gone up. All these new people moved there in the last 3 or 4 years, pushed all this stuff up. It's unaffordable. The city council's dealing with all these things. And guess what? It sucks in the winter.
Right.
Period. Like you could have 30, 40 inches of snow. And I think that's a really small market. And so it's, has yet to be seen whether or not people are going to start moving away from there. But these are largely second homes. It's definitely not a place where you're going to work. Period. Right? It's a place where you're going to have a second home, and so what's going to happen is it's going to peak, and then it's going to come down again. Period. Right? And people, if we are going into a recession and we have these high inflation, you're going to start to see people moving away from what would consider to be that, second, third home markets. They just are, because they're going to be also, figuring out how to not have all that expense, and so the market will come back down again. By the way, the house, as you may or may not know, the house that I owned there was about a third when I bought it from its peak prior to that. And then it went back up and I sold it. So even my home, which was built in 1905, has gone like this over the years. You can just track it and watch. You can see the different sales prices over the years. So that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
You're going to start to see people move away from some of these hot markets. I believe, just like it's happened in the past. And I'm telling you, it's coming.
So the next kind of thing to answer or to ask them is, and I think this is really important, do you put your own money into your own deals?
Yeah, oh yeah, every time. Yeah,
right.
Every single one. And I think, well, first of all, a lot of the lenders require that.
Right.
So, yeah, Ross and I do. We do it not because we have to. We do it because we want to. It's very different. So if I'm going to, I mean, where else would I want my money than in a deal that I'm buying? The only issue I have is I don't have enough to buy it myself. So that's really my issue. My issue is, when we're doing let's say 80 to 100 million of equity a year, which is not untypical, and buying this $300 or $400 million of real estate, you just don't have that kind of savings, So we're spreading it around in these different deals. So the goal of every real estate investor, honestly, is to actually have buy these deals themselves. But as you start to scale and go bigger, you bring on different different investors and things like that. So that's kind of why it's done. But I think that if a syndicator is not investing in their deal, or they don't have the money, you probably should find out why.
Right.
That's the biggest issue, because they should be. It's called pari passu. They should be investing alongside of you.
And then I think this is interesting. So we would ask them, have you ever had a deal go bad, and what did you do?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people listening are going to say, well, it's best if they have never had a deal go bad. That's the best answer. Like, I've never had a deal go bad. Well, put it this way. You don't want to be the first deal that's ever gone bad, because they don't know how necessarily to handle a deal that's gone bad. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now with these newer investors and the changing market and the changing interest rates. You learn from experience. So it's actually best if they have had a deal go bad, and then you understand how they handled that, and then you can judge them on how they handled it.
It's just experience and wisdom.
Yeah.
I remember one of the very first questions that Robert Kiyosaki asked me was, have you ever lost money for an investor? Right? The very first one, almost in the first 5 or 10 minutes. And what he was doing was testing me. I didn't realize it at the time till afterwards. I thought it was a fantastic question. And you should be asking this question to people, because you don't really learn a lot, in my experience, when the market's making you look good and you get a bigger ego and all that stuff. You learn a lot when it turns. And right now things are turning for people. And how you deal with your investors, how you deal with your lenders, how you're positioning your property from a management standpoint, all of that stuff is wisdom and experience. And I already know there's a lot of stress points happening right now all over. And I think it's important that you guys need to understand this. And this is what I think a lot of syndicators, especially the younger ones, in the last 10 years have never experienced anything than a market going up. They think next year is going to be better than last year. And that is the issue. They're not used to rising interest rates. They're not used to rising operating expenses. They're not used to cap rates going up. They have never experienced it. So especially if they got into the business, just 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, and that kind of brings to a point. Jesse on here commented he or she invests in 3 rental properties. They feed them every month because they don't cash flow. But he or she said it's like having a bank account still, because they're getting all this equity. And a lot of the users on here commented, right, as long as it keeps going up in value.
Well, no, if you sell, then you have equity.
Right.
But you don't have equity. It's fake.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't exist. I mean, it does, but only because you did a rough calculation on it for now. And I hope it's always there for you. But the point is, you can't. That's it's false. It's phantom equity until you actually sell it and actually get the money in your bank account. Then it's real.
Exactly. And this is what happens. Like when you do that, that's why you'll freak out when prices go down and maybe even below what you bought it for. And then you'll freak out and you'll list your home, like we have people starting to do right now, and more inventory is coming to the market and prices are declining. When you invest for cash flow, you don't have to worry about how much the home's worth. So everything that we own kind of went up significantly during COVID, but we don't care if it goes back down because that's not really what we're investing for. We're investing for the monthly cash flow that comes in because the market's always going to go like this, and it is going to come down right now. We're seeing it. We're peaking. So, if that's the reason that you're investing and you're dealing with properties that don't cash flow, there's a potential you could be in a bind later on.
You're going to want to build reserves for sure if you have them. It sounds like you're negative now, so I'm not sure how you do that, but you're going to want to make sure that you have that just in case, because you are a little bit more exposed than others. One of the things that saved my butt during the, call it 06, 7, 8 was that I had cash flow coming in while my values were going down. But again, it didn't matter that my values were going down because I'm not selling. I don't have to sell. I'm not refinancing. I'm not forced to refinance. I'm not doing a value add to try to sell. I'm literally managing the cash flow. So then the values came back around again. So you again, I think a lot of people look at real estate like a stock, or some like something that you just invest in and you don't have to really manage. A stock is easy. It's so easy. You just give money to somebody and you watch it. It goes up, goes down. This is not that. So this is very different. The one thing I do like about real estate is it's slow.
Mm-hmm.
It's very slow.
Slow and steady.
Slow and steady, up and down. And right now you guys are just experiencing the downside.
Absolutely. So this is an interesting one. So you would ask them, are you sponsoring any other investments? And if so, how many?
Me?
No, that's what you would ask a syndicator.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yes, that's a good question. So the sponsors, so what that...
Explain what it means.
Yeah. So what happens a lot of times is you got a sponsor that is actually the one actually doing the deal, right?
Mm-hmm. And
they're attracting a lot of money, and sometimes they attract people, and they're investing in all kinds of things.
Right.
And that's really the question. And this boils down to kind of the focus,
mm-hmm.
in my opinion. So if somebody's putting together a fund, as an example, and they're like, well, we're going to do some multifamily, we're going to buy some medical, we're going to maybe get some self-storage, we're going to do some land development. That's super confusing
mm-hmm.
to the investor, because they're like, well, okay. So because all of those have different returns, and all of those are extremely different. They're very different businesses. So I think that you want to find somebody with a track record in whatever it is that you're investing in, as an example.
When we teach in our master course, you can't be a jack of all trades. So if you're investing in a bunch of different things, and you're not really focused on one thing, you might not be very good at any of it.
It's possible. I know that from my own personal experience. I've been in the multifamily space a long time, so I made a lot of money in 05, 6, 7, 8, and I never really looked back from that point. That's really when I started to, my net worth really started to go crazy. But then I decided, okay, I'm going to try all these different things. And I did. I invested in tech. I invested in I invested in office. I invested in self-storage. I invested in land development. I invested in single family. At one point we were doing 20-acre home sites in like Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we believed that we had the Midas touch. And what I found is that all of those were significantly different. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so that was the lesson for us. We got into condos, we got into condo conversions, all of that stuff. I did all that. And so what Ross and I decided, my partner, is, you know what? We're going to stick to our knitting here. We're going to start to be really, really, really good at what we are good at, which is multifamily. We're just trying to be the best that we can in that space, and that's proved to be a good decision.
So Jen from YouTube wanted to know, is it appropriate to ask to speak to current investors? is that okay to do that?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, of course. I mean, you could talk to whoever you want. I think you just got to you got to figure out why you would want to do that. I think the better.
Probably to see how happy they were with the investments they've invested in.
Oh, ones prior, you mean?
Yeah, the ones that are incurring.
Yeah.
Right,
of course,
right.
you could do that. Yeah. I think, yeah. In my case, we've had, investors for 20 years. So we have investors year over year over year, and we have had that request from time to time. I think that's perfectly reasonable. It's no different than, if you're turning your money over to a wealth manager and you want to talk to some of their clients, it's the same thing. So I think that's reasonable, totally. But if you're the real issue, everybody forgets what pays you back. Like, let's think about that. Like, what actually pays everyone?
Right.
What one thing? The actual asset that you invest in, period.
Right.
That's it. Nothing else. So the matter of how it's managed, the matter of how it's feed, the matter of how it's reported, all that is different from person to person. But the asset itself is what pays everyone. And that is, I think, you got to keep top of mind. So that's the bigger issue.
And Stephen had asked, how do you gauge energy companies? How do you gauge ATM investing? And he had a few, and it just all comes down to the numbers and the math. Like, we're not experts at all of those things, but you just have to really understand it and really understand the numbers.
It's based on the operation of that particular. It's a good question. I had a good friend that was in the ATM business, and here's what I learned. It was a woman. She sold all of them to E-Trade, did very well and retired actually, but she had ATMs all over the country, and she had them in shopping malls. She had them in kind of regional areas. She had them in strip clubs. I remember she was telling me, and she had them in all over the place. And the number one most profitable one that she had was in a really, really tiny New York deli. Like, literally, she's like, this thing just kicks off cash like crazy. And it's the smallest location she had for whatever reason. So there are dynamics that happen around everything. You would not think that. You would think, oh, I'll stick one in a casino, or I'll stick one, in a mall, or, you have different payouts based on people's needs at the time. And this particular one obviously was what killed it for, even more than her strip club once that she had. So it's just interesting. So you have to really get into the details of that, the operations and the flow of money in and out.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump into our Inner Circle questions. If you want to become an Inner Circle member, go to kensinnercircle.com. We have once a month happy hours, once a month book clubs. You can ask Ken questions. For those of you that have asked a question, we are working diligently to get them all answered this week. So we will be, we're a little bit behind, so we'll be catching up and getting them to you.
We had a really good advisor call with Mauricio and Eric last week, which are two advisors we have on the channel, guys, one for legal and tax, for the people that are in Inner Circle. We had so many questions we couldn't get to them, and so what we're doing is we're answering them offline later. But there was just so many coming in that hour, so we do appreciate those. And by the way, those do turn into videos. Some of those, some of these questions are incredible questions, and so we're like, that would be a great video. So I know Mauricio and Eric both after the call were like, I just have 2 or 3 more videos there that I can produce, because those are, and they're so obvious at the time.
Yep, absolutely. So our first question comes from Ty. They're asking, how do I budget for maintenance and repairs each month? How much to put away?
Yeah, so it's not. It does depend on the age. So if you have something that's brand new, you're going to have to budget less. If you're going to have something that is built in the 70s or 60s, let's say, you might want to budget more. So it depends more on the age of the asset itself. So for us, we take a look at the condition of the property. I'll just give you an example. Let's say you own something that's 20 years old, and you know that you're going to need a roof in 5 years. So you just work backwards. Okay, the roof's going to be $5,000. 5 years from now, I need to escrow $1,000 a year toward that roof. So that's how you're supposed to do it based on maintenance needs. And then you're going to want to have at least a 20% contingency for anything else like a plumbing issue or something like that. But you want to take a look at all the individual components of the real estate and then work backwards. Like if you have a pool, there's pool equipment. If you have a driveway, or you have carports, or you have a paint job, or you have landscape issues, or whatever those things are, you just want to back up and you want to escrow a little bit for each of those. The HOAs generally are pretty good with this. They're called reserves, or you have a reserve study. So a reserve study would take all the common areas and divide it by the number of units, and then divide it by the month and months, and then that would be your reserve amount each month toward the bigger picture. So that's how you'd want to do it.
Absolutely. So Eric from the Inner Circle wants to know which is better: closing a loan that is personally guaranteed while taking title in an LLC, or closing a loan that has a 1% lower rate while taking title in my personal name and then transferring my property to the LLC with my lender's approval. It's a lot.
No, it's okay. Well, first of all, I don't necessarily. Oh, there it is. Sorry. So one, I try to avoid personal guarantees. So that's when you said that, it threw me a bit. So the way, I just want to be clear, the LLC is only for asset protection. Right. And I think what happens a lot of times is it doesn't really matter if the loan's in the LLC or not. In my opinion, I don't really care.
Right.
Especially if you have a personal guarantee. If you have a personal guarantee, it's irrelevant that you have an LLC.
I actually think it makes the loan more expensive if it's in the LLC.
Could be, yeah. So the purpose of the LLC, in my opinion, is to protect the equity that you might have. So let me give you an example. If I bought a $500,000 house and I put $100,000 down, I had a $400,000 loan that was personal, I would put an LLC around the partnership or the entity, call it SPE or single purpose entity, around the whole thing. The loan would be separate. It has nothing to do with the LLC, really. It's especially if it's personal. The point of an LLC is not to get away from that personal guarantee. What you're protecting is the equity. So let's say that same deal, you have a tenant that gets injured in there and sues you. They sue you personally, then they have access to your equity. Or they sue the LLC. So if they're paying to Eric's Real Estate LLC, their check to the rent, all the money's going into that bank account. That's who they sue. Now they have to what's called pierce the corporate veil to get after your equity. So the loan is always going to be sitting there, period, especially if it's personal.
Yeah, and then when you said transferring the property to an LLC with my lender's approval, they typically don't give approvals for that. They typically don't pool the loan. We've heard on a couple occasions, but they typically won't. They probably won't give you an approval for that.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to have to pierce the corporate veil either.
Yeah.
So our next question comes from Chad on the Inner Circle. He said, when researching a market and I'm looking at the quality of schools, in the area I'm looking, the charter schools and private schools are great, but the public schools are bad. Since the other two are great, is that okay?
It depends if they live there. So yeah, I would say the reason that those charter and private schools are flourishing is because the public school system is bad. Now, what you won't have are people moving there to go to the public school, obviously, right? They might be moving there anyway, but the point is if that's their only option. A lot of it has to do with the, where people are coming from. So if I don't know enough about that area, but my experience has been that certainly I did this. My kids went to a Catholic school, and before they learned how to drive, we would drive them in the morning, and it was probably 30 minutes each way. So, you're not necessarily going to find always somebody that's trying to live next to a charter school, but it is possible.
Yeah, and John said, and this is my experience too, being a former teacher, is that, charter and public schools aren't great. And charter schools can be a little bit rough because they don't provide the same kind of funding. They don't get the same kind of funding, and they don't compensate the teachers the same and things like that. So charter schools, there's some great ones, but there's some really bad ones. So you just want to be careful on that.
I found that to be a real issue. I really believed that you corrected me on this. My kids went to this Catholic school in Scottsdale. I won't say which one, but the teachers were not that more paid. They weren't paid that much more.
They're usually paid less.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
So public school teachers make more. Typically, private school teachers make less. Their behaviors are a little bit easier because anybody really bad gets kicked out, right? But yeah, like my friend taught not that long ago, probably 5 years ago in Ohio at a private school, Catholic school. She made $23,000 a year.
Yeah, I found that to be interesting because first of all, it was expensive. I want to say, well, let's just put it this way: when my kids went to University of Arizona, their tuition went down. Like, think about that real quick. So the college was less. And I was like, well, again, not that pays everything. I found that was really interesting to me that the charter school and some of these private schools don't pay.
Well, and it's funny because you initially were like, no, they got paid well. And I guarantee people are listening that kids go to private. No, they get paid well. Well, dive in because I haven't heard of any that do.
Dive into this issue. I couldn't believe it. Of course, this one here, she was a teacher.
Used to be a teacher,
so she schooled me.
Oh, yes. So the next question comes from Andy. He said, I have a triplex with a 30-year 3.3 fixed. I also have a HELOC on it to fund the ADU construction. Any way I can cash out refi after construction without losing the primary mortgage?
Ooh, I don't think so.
Nope, buddy.
Yeah.
You got the 3.3. Be happy about that. But yeah, you can't.
Yeah. If the ADU is detached, you might be able to separate it on a parcel of its own and have a separate loan on it. But don't tell anybody I told you that.
You can try. Yes.
Okay, you could try.
So Nick is asking from the inner circle. He owns 40 plus single family, small multifamilies in Oregon. About $3 million worth of equity. Because of the anti-landlord environment in Oregon, would you liquidate and do a 1031 to a more landlord-friendly state?
I don't know where that is right now. We're all under attack.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, first of all,
Oregon's pretty extreme,
tough.
But yeah.
Well, my guess is first of all, congratulations. I don't disagree with the question, but I do think it's a more complex question. One is you probably have pretty good debt on there, would be my guess, because you've owned them a while. That's gold. So, I think you're trading out low cost debt and for something that's higher cost in a more landlord friendly market. It's probably not a good decision right now. So if I were you, I would hold on to that. The other thing is, the other side of these states or cities that are passing some of these, it's going to be interesting to see who they give the money to. So, in other words, I believe you're going to start to see some rent assistance at state and local levels. So it might not be a bad spot for you to just stay and hang for a while.
Plus, when the landlord laws are that unfriendly, there's not much building, right? There's not much competition.
Yeah, that's the other piece. It's a really good point, actually. There's a lot of what's going to happen probably in those, what will happen in those markets. And by the way, I saw it in Portland, although Portland's a bit of a battle zone right now. I used to own stuff in Portland until just not even a year or two ago, maybe, and they don't want development. So what happens is you have these folks that don't want real estate development there, yet they're trying to grow population. So low supply, high demand, high prices, high rent, and then what they do is they Band-Aid it by throwing these caps on there or passing rent control. And the whole thing is completely underpinned by a supply issue. So if somebody wants to move somewhere and they can't afford it, then they start to cap it. That is good to like what Danille said is right. You'll start to see low supply coming into a market is going to actually help you on the value. That is, if people are moving there.
Right.
If they're moving away, then that's probably not the case. So.
Yep. But and to be clear, because his are in Portland, but you only sold yours in Portland because it was like a one-off condo that you had bought when you developed something.
If you know a property called McCormick Pier, I bought it from the Nato family, which is Nato Parkway, right there along the Willamette River, and we bought the whole thing, 301 units, and I had the models. I sold it off. That was one of my condo conversions back from 2005. So, and it had gone way up in price. But I sold it because the crime was high. They were defunding the police. The homelessness was bad. And I felt like, okay, these are not good things. There are going to be people that don't want to go into the city, don't want to move there. And so I sold it before all that kind of got out of control. Again, I haven't been, we went there a couple of years ago, and it was, quite frankly, kind of scary.
But you kind of contradicted yourself there, because you told him that you would keep them, but that you sold yours.
Well, I would. It depends on where they are. This one in particular was right downtown. It was dangerous.
Right.
We had, it does depend on location. I'm glad you called me out on that, because you're right. It depends on where. If mine were literally downtown, as you know where that is, near Union Station, it was a little dicey down there. So when a market changes, or a sub-market, I should say, changes, it changes the demographics, and it changes who wants to be there. You're not going to get, the all-American family with kids move into that place.
Right.
That's what I mean. You're not going to get the seniors. You might, but you get my point. People make decisions based on crime. And people make decisions based on safety. And you're starting to see that now. So that's what I meant. So I'm glad but there are other areas of Portland that are killing it, So
right.
It might be like the suburb of Lake Oswego, is obviously a high-end area. So I don't know where they are, but it's a good point.
So Josephine from YouTube said, what do you do when you have a ridiculously demanding tenant?
You should talk about this one.
I don't even know what to do about that.
This is a good one.
I need that advice.
By the way, I just heard her bitching about this yesterday.
Yeah, yep.
Right? Well, let's talk.
No, we're not going to talk about that specific situation.
Okay.
But what do you do about that?
No, I asked you.
I think it really... You want to have a good relationship with your tenants. You try to have a good relationship with your tenants. Sometimes you have to remind your tenants that it's a partnership and a two-way road.
Perfect. Yep.
And they need to be reasonable, and you need to be reasonable. And if they're not being reasonable, even after you try to have that conversation, then you just have to pull out the lease. And that's why the lease is so important.
Yeah, it should be it's a really well said. So what happens a lot of times is, it's the same way with the way you manage an employee, right? It has to be, what I call, you're either in exchange or out of exchange. Let's just say it that way. So there needs to be this, you need to be attentive to the tenant, and they need to be attentive back to you, to be like if there's an issue happening, they need to let you be there at reasonable hours, and they need to let you have access, and there needs to be this kind of push-pull there. And as a landlord, you do have the upper hand. You don't have to renew them.
Yeah.
Period. And so we've had situations where you move people in and they can be a problem, not necessarily just for us, but the people that they never seem to be happy, and they're disrupting people around them, as an example. And there's just a lot of drama, and it's really not my battle to fight, and I'm not going to, but you just have to you have to treat everyone the same, with the same kind of rules, and try to work as much as you can around their schedules. There's all kinds of things that go on, and but in every landlord-tenant law is a little bit different. But most of the time, you can give people notice per the landlord-tenant law and enter the unit at any time based on a reasonable amount of notice. So there's all these things to protect both sides. And what they always threaten are what I would consider to be small little things, like, my dishwasher's broken, or, whatever, like, it could be these simple little things, or my light bulbs, right? The light bulbs, think about that, light bulbs, So I think sometimes they just cross that line. It's just an education.
Well, they ask, right? Like, I had tenants one time be like, hey, someone needs to come over to tighten my shower curtain. It's not tight enough. And I'm thinking, I could do that. So you kind of have to put it on them. And that's why I started putting in my leases, because of these tenants, the landlord will keep the property habitable. And what that means is livable. Yeah. So I don't have to, just because you broke your cabinet, I don't have to send up somebody over there to fix it.
It's a damage issue that comes out of your deposit.
It's a damage issue, right? I don't have to do those things. Now, if, the dishwasher doesn't work or the stove breaks, then I'm going to fix that stuff. But it's also not an emergency.
Yeah.
I don't, I've had it, I need someone out here tomorrow because of my dishwasher. It's like, no, I'll get somebody out in a reasonable amount of time. Right. Now, if it's your air, it's your heat, it's winter, it's summer.
Big deal.
It's a bigger deal.
Heat in the winter or air in the summer, right. in Arizona specifically. Yeah, those are big deals.
So you're trying to get somebody out within 24 hours.
Water.
Flood.
Yes,
and so
fire.
There's things that come up. But, you don't, and you have to train your tenants a little bit on this, because when they test you, right? It's like any relationship. So if you start handling things, if you start caving to their demands, my dishwasher's broken, I need it fixed in 2 days because da-da-da-da, and you do that.
I'm going to move out. You're going to pay for my hotel. Yeah, you're going to start writing letters and all that stuff. You have to set their expectations.
You're setting a precedence, right? That they can be demanding, and you're just going to do it. And that's not how things work. Right. Like if they had their own home, they would schedule a repair person. They wouldn't pay an extra $150 for them to come out tomorrow to fix a dishwasher. They would wash dishes for a few days, so you can wash dishes by hand. Sometimes you have to remind your tenants of that. But you have to just keep them, in a good understanding. But at the end of the day, you always have to refer back to the lease if things start to get very tense around something. And I think it's funny, M. Deering on YouTube said, to needy tenants, I'll be happy to let you out of the lease in 30 to 60 days.
Yeah.
And that is true,
that
too.
Is true.
And I've said that. I said, listen, you seem unhappy. You seem like, you don't like living here. So if you want to break your lease, I just need a, 30 or sometimes 60-day notice.
I'll let you out early. Go. Yeah, we've said that.
And
you know what? You don't look happy? We'll let you out early. No. It's almost always a no. No.
Taking me up on it. Yep.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be equally as unhappy at the next place. That's just who they are.
Correct. They're gonna move that behavior, which they must have too much of their mother's milk or something. I don't really know what happened, but at the end of the day, they've learned that behavior from someone, and it's just being respectful.
Well, and Brenda brought up a funny point. She said, don't clean their hair out of the drains. Amazing how many tenants demand that. So as a newer landlord, I used to pay for all the plumbing. Like if, the toilet got backed up or the drain got backed up, I would just pay for that. Like I'll handle that. Now they can call a plumber. They can handle that. If the plumber tells me what blocked the drain with sediment from, which they never have. But if that were the case, I will pay for that because that comes from the sediment of the pipe or whatever. Typically it's hair, a toy, whatever, and they need to pay for that because they did that.
Guys, this happens all the time.
You just learn.
Yeah, tenants do stuff in your places, trust me, and they're going to want you to pay for it. Mm-hmm. They're never going to take that behavior on. ever. Now it's every once in a while. Like we have one tenant that's awesome.
Oh yeah, we have a great tenant. Yep. He actually needed the sprinklers fixed in the yard, which was his first request in over a year, and it really was an us issue because he didn't break the sprinklers; they just weren't working right, and he even offered to pay for it, and we're like, no, we get this, but he's very reasonable.
Yeah.
He's not demanding, and at this point at least, and he just kind of handles things on his own too.
And I would say that's the majority. I had a guy that was in one of my places for 8 or 9 years, and I think I had a water heater go out and maybe a water softener once, and he's like, "Oh, I'll take care of it for you." And he sent me the bill, and we figured it out. So that's generally what you have, but then there are people that are going to push that envelope, and you just got to set their expectations. I say fire, flood, or blood. Fire, flood, or blood. That's it. Yep. Those are the emergencies.
Exactly. And, everything else can and throw in there air and heat, but everything else can just be handled. And, you be a good landlord. I mean, it's up to you to be a good landlord as well on the other side of that and not blow off things that they need done. If their dishwasher breaks, you don't want to wait a month to get them a new one.
Right.
But, it's a relationship. But, you have to remind them that they are in a lease with you, and they cannot be demanding. There's nowhere in the lease that says, I'm going to fix this in a day. There's nowhere in the lease that says, I'm going to be at your beck and call. We're going to work emergencies around your schedule.
But you can have these conversations with them, and you can actually put this in your lease, is that the landlord will make every attempt to try to rectify this situation, within 48 hours, 72 hours, or something like that. You can actually put all this stuff in there, and then you can pull it out if you like, and say, listen, we talked about this. It's in your lease. You sign this. It's not going to help because they're going to be unreasonable anyway, but you can do all that if you like.
Risa said they have a tenant who didn't bother to tell them a huge tree came down, missing the garage by inches. They didn't notice till they went over there.
Oh my gosh.
It's not their place, and every tenant's different, and so, and it also works the other way too. Like if you have tenants that, and this is my experience, that never tell you anything, like you don't hear from them for like a year. Now our tenant is very handy, so I'm sure he's fixing things. But I've had some young female tenants that have, rented my places. And then when the year's up, there's so many things that don't work. Like the hot water doesn't work. Like this doesn't work. Like this was broken. The dryer.
That's not good either.
And that's not good either, because now when you move the new tenant in, they discover all these issues, right? Because they're like, well, the dryer doesn't really dry my clothes, and the stove's not really working. But because, I think the girl that I had staying there, she was at her boyfriend's half the time. She probably did all her stuff over there. It kind of falls apart on the other way too. So the perfect balance is having somebody that does call when things break, but not be demanding and unreasonable.
Yeah. So good.
Awesome.
That's a good one.
Well, we will see you guys next week. Make sure to join us tonight for happy hour and to get your Limitless tickets. And I didn't mention it, but hit the like button, pretty please. Get us over 100.
See you guys.
See you guys.
Hey.